the British aircraft dart over Nazi-occupied France. Below, German tanks are already on the move, aiming to wipe out the gains of D-Day. The railway leading to Normandy has to be destroyed. The Mosquito pathfinders give the signal. A group of Avro Lancasters releases a wave of general-purpose bombs, but none strike. It's time to go bigger. One of the pilots drives his Lancasters forward and releases a payload twice the weight of anything the RAF has ever unleashed. But as it falls, it lands on a hillside, far from any visible rail line. There's no explosion. Was it a dud? One of the commanders asks over the radio. Then the trees begin to move. A roar rises from the point of impact, and an earthquake shakes the entire region. Britain's newest weapon didn't miss. It found its mark, 60 feet deep. Alarms wailed into the night, piercing the silence as dark shapes began to draw high above the city. Civilians had just enough time to jump out of bed and look out the window to witness a pack of bombers coming down from the dark clouds above. For years, German bombers had haunted English skies, raining fire on towns and military outposts alike. But on this night, it would be different. Now, it was the British who had come hunting. Germans across the streets stirred in panic. Soldiers and civilians scrambled for shelter as the hum of British engines swelled. The target lay deep in the city, a factory, shielded, reinforced, and still churning out war material. The bombers lined up for their run, pilots gripping the controls. Without a direct hit, the attack would be for nothing. Bomb bay doors yawned open, releasing a string of general-purpose bombs. One by one, they tumbled. Windows shattered under the blasts, but the factory stood untouched. The bombs were scattered widely, spreading chaos, but unable to achieve their goal. The pilots circled, readying for a second pass. However, they weren't alone in the sky anymore. Streaks of tracer fire arced upward as a pack of Luftwaffe fighters rose fast to meet them. The British tightened the formation, weaving through the storm of gunfire as they made a turn back to base. Their revenge would have to wait for another night. After years of these grinding campaigns, it had become clear that even the best-trained crews could not guarantee precision with the weapons they had. They had pushed the limits, loading up bombs of up to 4,000 pounds, but against hardened targets, they remained outpowered. Germany knew this. Hitler's U-boat pens, the viaducts that fed his war machine, and the bunkers that housed his secret weapons, each one had been armored and reinforced, immune to conventional bombardment. British military strategists understood that in order to win this war, they needed a weapon unlike any ever built, a bomb that didn't just explode, but fractured the very earth beneath its target, an earthquake bomb. The moment World War II erupted, English inventor Barnes Wallis began sketching the outline for a 10-ton superbomb, capable of vaporizing Hitler's mightiest strongholds with just one strike. To unleash its full power, this giant destroyer would have to be released from an altitude of 40,000 feet, allowing it to gather immense speed as it plunged toward the Earth, potentially reaching supersonic velocity before impact. However, it wasn't designed to explode on contact. Instead, its sharp nose would drive it deep underground, burying itself up to 135 feet beneath the surface. Then, installed beneath the Earth like a seismic charge, it would detonate. The blast would trigger a localized earthquake, strong enough to register 3.6 on the Richter scale, tearing through the Earth beneath enemy fortifications. Structures within a 29-acre radius would be ripped apart or undermined, leaving behind a massive crater that swallowed everything around it. It was a promising concept, but among British officials, there was skepticism. No aircraft in the Royal Air Force's inventory could lift such a payload. Wallis proposed a solution: design a bomber specifically built to carry his earthquake bomb. He called it the Victory Bomber. It was set to boast 6 engines, at a time when the RAF had yet to field even a 4-engine bomber, allowing it to climb to 45,000 feet and cruise at 320 miles per hour, all while cradling a payload of up to 22,000 pounds in its belly. Such performance came with a price. Its only protection would be a lone tail-mounted quad-gun turret, a last-ditch shield should enemy fighters get near. Precision would be paramount. Striking from such heights meant developing an advanced gyroscopic bomb sight, one capable of guiding the bomb with extreme accuracy toward its distant target, giving that single strike its best chance to inflict maximum devastation. A wooden wind turret model of the Victory bomber was built, but that was as far as the project would go. In May 1941, officials pulled the plug. The war effort was already straining to deliver new fleets of bombers. Devoting precious resources to Wallace's experiment seemed like an unacceptable risk. Yet the idea refused to go away. The RAF may have abandoned the Victory bomber, but they'd been quietly developing another aircraft, one that perhaps could be exactly what Barnes-Wallis needed to unleash his super bombs. After years of struggling with underpowered bombers and mounting losses, the Royal Air Force had developed the Avro Lancaster, a machine driven by 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines and wider wings that granted it a lift and range unmatched by anything RAF pilots had flown before. And the Lancaster's immense strength wasn't wasted, as engineers quickly began loading its 33-foot bomb bay with the nation's heaviest, most powerful ordnance. Once airborne, the Lancaster got to work with the latest Allied technology. Advanced navigation radars, ground-link communications, and Pathfinder-guided bombing runs allowed its crew to thread their way through the flak-filled skies of enemy territory undetected. But should German Luftwaffe night fighters come hunting, the Lancaster was no easy prey. It carried 4 defensive gun turrets and a strike-resistant fuselage, capable of soaking up multiple hits. It was said a Lancaster could lose 2 engines and still make its way back home across hundreds of hostile miles. By mid-war, the Lancaster had become the leader of Britain's heavy bombing force, going on to deliver more than 600,000 tons of bombs across Axis territory. In May 1943, a formation of Lancasters from the 617th Squadron unleashed Barnes-Wallis's experimental bouncing bombs. Skipping across the surface of the Ruhr's great rivers, these spinning steel cylinders leaped over torpedo nets before slamming into the great dams that powered Germany's industrial heartland. The resulting floods wreaked havoc on enemy infrastructure and morale alike. After this success, RAF commanders considered the next step: unleash Wallace's ultimate super bomb. However, as Wallace and his engineers studied the Lancaster's capabilities, they quickly realized that even this mighty bomber was still not strong enough for an earthquake bomb. The first super bomb that Barnes-Wallis designed was known as the Tall Boy. It was thought to be able to punch through 16 feet of reinforced concrete, gouging craters up to 100 feet wide and 80 feet deep, breaking the foundations of entire structures. To fuel such destruction, Wallace discarded traditional TNT and instead filled the Tall Boy with Torpex, an advanced explosive 50% more powerful. Filling the weapon was not easy. The Torpex had to be carefully melted, poured layer by layer, and sealed beneath the final inch of TNT and wax. The process was complex, painstaking, and expensive, so much so that the RAF could only afford to produce a limited number. And there was one more obstacle. The finished bomb was 21 feet long, nearly 3 feet across, and tipped the scales at 12,000 pounds, far too heavy for any standard Lancaster bomber to lift. Yet the RAF wasn't about to discard the project again. RAF engineers began racing to modify the Lancaster, stripping away everything non-essential to lighten the load. Armor plating and defensive guns were removed, leaving crews dangerously exposed. If they were intercepted by Luftwaffe fighters, there would be little to save them. And the risk was very real. Even after modification, the Lancaster couldn't hope to reach the 45,000-foot drop altitude Wallace had dreamed of. The best it could manage was around 18,000 feet, well within reach of the Luftwaffe's lethal Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters, whose speed and firepower made them a nightmare to evade. Precision became everything. For the Tall Boy to succeed, pilots needed to fly only in perfect conditions with ideal temperature, wind speed, and visibility. If the weather turned against them mid-flight, they were forbidden to jettison the bomb over friendly or enemy territory. Instead, crews were forced to reroute, often landing on emergency airstrips with the still live Tall Boy in their bomb bays, hoping it wouldn't detonate on impact. The odds were long. The danger was enormous. But for the first time, the RAF had a weapon that could crack targets once thought invulnerable. The moment to test the Tall Boy finally arrived in June 1944. Allied intelligence reported that the Germans were mobilizing a Panzer division through France's Loire region, using a vital railway artery that threaded through the hills, vanishing into a tunnel close to a riverbed. If those tanks reached the front, they could smash through the fragile Allied foothold in Normandy. There was no time to second guess. As darkness fell on June 8th, 617th Squadron sprang into action. In the airfield, ground crews swarmed around the waiting Lancasters, wrestling with the tall boys, as each was carefully winched and locked into place beneath the open bomb bays. But the Germans were already on the move, and time was slipping away. Before all the aircraft could be fully armed, the order came to take off at once. 3 Lancasters were left behind on the tarmac. The rest, a strike force of 25 aircraft, shot into the night, 19 armed with tall boys, 6 with general-purpose bombs. Hours later, high over the Loire, a group of de Havilland Mosquitoes from 83rd Squadron's Pathfinder force, flying with the bombers to help them find their mark, gave the signal, launching a round of flares into the night sky. One by one, the Lancasters lined up and released their payloads. From above, pilots watched as streams of steel fell down into the abyss. The tall boys spun gracefully on their axis, their flared tail fins ensuring stability for maximum penetration. The bombs clashed against the ground, and after a few seconds of silence, the earth erupted. A string of explosions spread across the area. One tall boy, perfectly aligned, smashed into the hillside, punching through layers of rock and soil before emerging inside the very tunnel the Germans had counted on. It detonated 60 feet deep below, obliterating the railway line. The tunnel was blocked. Now the Panzer Division would never cross. The Lancasters turned back and made it to base without a single loss. Before long, tall boys began to rain down on storage depots, hardened bunkers, and the fortified sites where Germany developed its flying bombs and rockets. In one such mission, a pilot from 617th Squadron released his tall boy with so much precision that it slammed into the ground just 50 yards from its target, a V-2 launch site. When the bomb detonated, the entire facility was torn apart. The tall boy also became a formidable weapon against Hitler's U-boat pens. Tall boys punched through thick roofs with ease, their blasts ripping open the pens and forcing boats to flee in panic into exposed waters, where Allied aircraft were ready to hunt them down. But perhaps the tall boy's greatest triumph came during the Allied hunt for one of the Kriegsmarine's most dreaded weapons, the battleship Tirpitz. One of only 2 Bismarck-class battleships constructed, and the heaviest warship ever built by any European navy, Tirpitz was a floating fortress that loomed as a constant threat to Allied convoys and Soviet forces. Though she'd been wounded in earlier attacks by British midget submarines, no Allied force had managed to finish her. In September 1944, Lancasters of 617th Squadron took to the skies. As they reached the fjord where Tirpitz lay hidden, German anti-aircraft crews rushed to grab their guns, but they were too late. Lancaster crews began their attack run. Tall boys began to tumble, and though none of the bombs struck the hull directly, several detonated within the waters just off Tirpitz's starboard bow. The concussive force drove 2,000 tons of seawater into her compartments, crippling her maneuverability. Additional blasts buckled her hull, flung sailors to the decks, and left the mighty ship wallowing helplessly. The raid rendered Tirpitz unfit to sail. For weeks, Lancaster bombers returned to Norway, each time carrying more tall boys. The Germans fought to keep their flagship alive, but it was a losing battle. On the morning of November 12, 1944, the final blow came. With the Arctic dawn breaking over the fjord, Lancaster bombers once again braved the flak and roared in overhead. This time, 2 tall boys struck home. The first blew open her deck amidships, flooding vital compartments. The second tore through near her turrets. The blast capsized Tirpitz within minutes. As the great battleship rolled over, sailors leapt into the freezing water, while those trapped below struggled in vain to escape. Soon, a massive secondary explosion sealed the ship's fate. After its many victories, it was decided that the tall boy was ready to go one step further, evolving into a new giant initially known as the Tall Boy Large, though soon it would earn a more fitting name, the Grand Slam. Weighing in at an unprecedented 22,000 pounds, the Grand Slam would nearly double the mass of its predecessor, stretching to nearly 26 feet in length while keeping the tall boy's same silhouette. It would be the largest bomb Britain had ever conceived, and in order to get it into the sky, the Lancaster would have to be modified once again. The Lancaster B-1 Special saved weight by stripping it of most of its defensive guns and armor. The bomb bay doors were removed entirely, as the Grand Slam was too large to fit inside. Now, It would have to hang half-exposed beneath the fuselage, secured by a reinforced release mechanism. Given that pilots were still under strict orders to bring the bomb back to base in case their mission was aborted, engineers had to strengthen the Lancaster's undercarriage, giving it the strength to absorb the crushing weight of a fully loaded touchdown. Months passed before these new Grand Slam Lancasters were ready for takeoff. When they finally arrived at 617th Squadron in March 1945, every man was eager to see if this insane plan would actually work. That test fell to Johnny Fauquier, the squadron's commanding officer. With the Grand Slam loaded beneath his Lancaster, Fauquier didn't wait for official clearance from Bomber Command. Instead, he simply ordered the airfield cleared and rolled out onto the runway. As Fauquier throttled forward, he quickly realized just how heavy the bomb truly was. He later recalled, quote, "At one point, I didn't think we would make it. Usually, we got airborne with a full load at around 110 miles per hour, and I was at 145. The wingtips of the airplane started to bend up, and I was wondering whether the wings would come off or what would happen." But Fauquier didn't back down. He kept pushing the throttle harder. The Lancaster raced down the strip, straining under the load, until finally it lifted clear of the runway and began its slow climb into the air. For 20 minutes, Fauquier kept the aircraft aloft, testing its handling, feeling for every vibration and shudder, making sure the Lancaster wouldn't betray him and break apart mid-flight. When he finally got the bomber back down onto the runway in one piece, he immediately reported back to Bomber Command, confirming that flying the new Lancasters with the Grand Slam aboard was, quote, quite safe. The British found the perfect target for the inaugural Grand Slam attack, the BL Field Viaduct. A key component of Nazi Germany's railway network, the viaduct had long defied Allied efforts to bring it down. Over 54 bombing raids and more than 3,500 tons of explosives had pounded the region, but the structure remained standing strong. Even the worst damage ever inflicted had been repaired within 24 hours. Before the mission could be greenlit, however, one final test was ordered, a live drop over a British bombing range to ensure the weapon would perform as promised. From the ground, officials watched in silence as a modified Lancaster B-1 Special flew into view, the Grand Slam visibly protruding from its exposed bomb bay. As the aircraft passed overhead, the release mechanism opened. The payload tumbled from the sky, whistling as it fell, then vanishing into the earth. Moments later, the ground erupted. The explosion hurled debris hundreds of feet into the air, leaving behind a crater 124 feet wide, 34 feet deep. Observers moved in cautiously, stepping over the scorched soil. One stunned witness later described the aftermath, quote, "There were minor explosions, like a volcano going off, from the gases still coming up." There was no doubt now that if the Grand Slam hit the viaduct, nothing would be left standing. The order was given. 2 Grand Slams were carefully loaded into the bomb bays of Johnny Fauquier and his flight commander, Charles Calder. Cranes and trolleys creaked under the weight as they hoisted the bombs into place. Ground crews worked as fast as they could, locking the bombs in with heavy steel clamps and triple-checking every mechanism. With engines howling, the bombers rolled toward the runway, ready to cross the English Channel and deliver the most devastating airstrike Hitler had ever seen. Shortly before takeoff, Johnny Fauquier knew something was wrong. His aircraft felt sluggish. Instinct kicked in. He ran through the checks again. Then came confirmation. One of the 4 mighty Rolls-Royce Merlin engines was failing. The Lancaster was famous for its resilience, able to limp home on just 2 engines if needed. But this wasn't just any mission. This wasn't just any payload. Fauquier tore himself out of the cockpit, leapt to the tarmac, sprinted across the airfield toward Charles Calder's Lancaster, waving frantically. He shouted, trying to flag Calder down, desperate to claim the honor of leading the first Grand Slam mission over Germany. But Calder's engines were already screaming. The massive bomber thundered forward, lifted off the ground, and disappeared into the sky as it carried the biggest bomb the Allies had built up until that point. 14 more Lancasters followed, yet all were armed with tallboys. Now Calder carried the only Grand Slam in the mission. Failure was not an option. After a couple hours in the air, the squadron spotted their target. Calder's aircraft was flying to just under 12,000 feet. It was below the ideal altitude for the Grand Slam, but it would have to do. Calder armed the release. The Grand Slam tumbled away. Around him, other bombers released their tall boys. The Grand Slam hit just 260 feet from the viaduct and burrowed deep into the ground. 11 seconds later, it detonated. From above, it was impossible to tell where the tall boys had struck and where the Grand Slam had hit. But when the smoke cleared, reports confirmed that a 260-foot span of the viaduct had been annihilated close to the section where the Grand Slam had landed. The indestructible target had finally been broken. Word of the success traveled fast. Air Marshal Arthur Harris, head of RAF Bomber Command, sent a note to 617th Squadron soon after, quote, "You've certainly made a proper mess of it this time. Keep up the training. We can't afford to put these new little pets in the wrong place." In the weeks that followed the Grand Slam's debut, the RAF unleashed a wave of precision air raids. With their newest weapons, Lancaster squadrons were able to tear through Germany's last line to defense nearly unchallenged. The results were so effective that American military planners took notice. Orders were placed for 100 Grand Slams and 500 tall boys to be shipped to the Pacific, where they'd be mounted beneath specially modified B-29 superfortresses to shatter the Empire's final strongholds and break its will to resist. However, the Grand Slam's reign would be brief. Germany capitulated on May 7th, and just months later, the atomic bombs brought Japan to its knees. The Grand Slams meant for the Pacific would never be dropped. In total, only 41 Grand Slams were deployed in World War II. Today, a handful of these mythical bombs remain alive, buried beneath former battlefields, having failed to detonate upon impact. In 2020, 750 residents were evacuated from the quiet Polish port town of Świnoujście after one tall boy was spotted sleeping beneath the murky depths of a Baltic Sea canal. Divers and ground crews got ready to defuse it, knowing that the odds of success were no better than a coin toss. The team found the giant resting, with its long steel nose poking out. They immediately got to work before it had a chance to awaken. But it was no use. Without warning, it roared to life. A massive column of seawater shot into the sky, and for a brief moment, the ground itself shook, unleashing the same power that had terrified Hitler himself so many decades before.